So I just hit record, everybody. So just kind of final warning here that this is being recorded and I am going to be posting this on YouTube afterwards. And you do have the option to scroll down and turn your video off at this point if you don't want or you're not comfortable with this being posted. All right, I'm going to start off with just a few logistics here, and then we'll dive into what we're actually going to cover tonight and what this whole Hunting with Heart series is all about. So first off, little internet disclaimer. I was supposed to be recording this in town on a fiber optic line. And I drove 40 minutes. I live out in rural kind of Muskoka, out in the country here on a little homestead. And I drove 40 minutes into town only to find out the fiber optic line that's supposed to be the stable system was actually down. I had to drive 40 minutes back into the country again. And now I'm streaming this from my rural internet satellite. So future calls, hopefully I'll be on a faster line. But if it's a little bit slow or glitchy, that's probably why. So my apologies for that tonight, but there wasn't much I could do. And this is better than nothing. And the last call worked all right as well. I already mentioned that this is being recorded and that you folks know you can turn your video off if you don't want it on the recording. And this is part of a series of calls that we're running called Hunting with Heart. And I'm going to just share my screen for a second here. So we've got an awesome lineup coming up over the next 5 weeks, really. So tonight I have a good friend of mine and my partner in the Hunter's Journey community and course, Caleb Musgrave. And I'll let Caleb introduce himself in a few moments here. And coming up next week, we've got Sal and Sandy Reed on September 22nd. We're going to be talking about preparing yourself to take a life, as well as doing an intro to small game hunting, which is a really great place to start if you're new to the art of hunting. Then we're going to take a week off because I'm taking off into the bush for a week with my wife to go disappear away from all technology. And I'm planning to come back, although we'll see. If I change my mind out there, Caleb will run the rest of the series without me. But if I do come back, October 14th will be our next call. And we have Daniel Vitalis coming on. And some of you may know him from the Wild Fed podcast, as well as the Wild Fed TV show. So we're going to be talking about learning to hunt right from start to finish with him. It should be a really fascinating call. He's just a fascinating person as well. And then, I'm missing one on here. We also have the week before that, Alexis Burnett. And we're going to be talking specifically about hunting white-tailed deer and naturalist skills being woven into hunting. And then after that, October 18th and beyond, we're going to be running a paid mentorship program. We're going to be going a lot deeper for anyone that wants to kind of carry on this journey. So all of these calls, I won't try and hide it. We do put on this free call series to kind of promote this paid mentorship. But I promise you, we're going to try and really deliver a ton of value and make sure that these are all standalone experiences. And those of you that aren't ready to jump into the paid course or it's not your thing, don't worry, we're going to make sure these are standalone. But I do want to let you folks know just up front that we do have a paid course that we're putting together. So that's the Hunting with Heart series there. The other thing I want to mention, maybe folks can scroll down to the bottom right now. If you're not used to Zoom, there's a little chat button down there. So you can click on the chat right now and just say hello to the group there. Maybe type in where you're from, say how you're doing. Yeah, Jason said the video is slow, but audio is good. Yeah, sorry about that, Jason. Next week, I should be on a higher speed place or higher speed connection. So hopefully the video will be a little less choppy that time. People popping in. So yeah, feel free to chat amongst each other throughout the night. As I mentioned, this call, it's going to be mostly myself and Caleb sharing, but in some of our future calls, we plan to have breakout rooms and have opportunity for you folks to share amongst each other and get to know each other a little bit better. And then the other thing I just want to share about the chat room is, we call this series Hunting with Heart. And it's really about bringing together people with shared values where hunting is about respect for the land. It's a sacred act that we get into, whatever sacred means to you. And I don't necessarily mean that in a religious way or a dogmatic way, but it's something we don't take lightly, harvesting a light. Those are the values that we're teaching this with. And I also want to share that, you're welcome to be here regardless of your background. So regardless of your gender, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your political views, we invite you to be here as long as you feel good about the values that we present with and the kind of approach that we go forth with. So I'm just going to kind of share that and just ask that at all times in the chat room, we show respect to everybody in there. And, in a group, we've got 47 people on here right now. We're going to have different views about things. We're going to have different political views. We might have different thoughts on hunting and what's ethical and what's not. Even amongst our instructor team, we're going to have different opinions, different philosophies. And I just want to say first and foremost that this is a place that we can all be ourselves and be respectful. And if there's any, and I don't want to say this as a threat, but there'll just be no tolerance for talking down to people. There'll be no tolerance for disrespectful language. And we won't hesitate to boot people out if they're not able to hold up to those guidelines. So I just kind of want to start with that. And hopefully that makes you feel comfortable to actually be yourself and to share freely and to feel part of this community here. So I'll just kind of leave it like that with my disclaimer right there. Maybe the other thing I would say, tonight's call is not about politics. It's about hunting with heart. But politics is a part of hunting, There's politics around conservation and land management. There's politics around, holding better relations with First Nations people and understanding their hunting rights on the lands. There's all kinds of politics that we could get into in the outdoors. And for those of you that are going on the deeper journey with us, or those of you that are joining us in the free online community, we will dive into some of the politics related to hunting as a part of this experience, because you can't separate from politics from everything. But tonight's call, we're not planning on getting into politics in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just going to kind of plant that seed as well. When we do bring politics into the course, it's going to be done in a container that we set up in a very intentional way. And I'll leave it there for right now. So something else that those of you that are familiar with me, actually, you know what? I'm going to just let you guys know where we're going, because some of you are probably wondering, well, what the heck am I joining here tonight? So let me show that first. I got a couple slides here. I'm going to throw this up and jump to this one right here. So what are we going to be covering in tonight's experience? So we're going to start off with a fairly short introduction to who I am and who Caleb Musgrave is, my co-host for tonight's evening, and then share a little bit about this community that we're building. And we are building both a free community and this paid deeper community, but we plan to have continued offerings in both of those going forward around this idea of the hunter's journey and hunting with heart. We're going to dive a little bit into kind of different pathways into hunting and the value of hunting in the modern world, especially when it's not necessarily required for subsistence for a lot of us anymore. So we're going to chat about that. From there, we're going to do an exercise. So there'll be an interactive component around kind of crafting your unique hunter story and your strategy, because all of us have our own unique relationship to hunting. We have different tactics we use. We might have different spiritual beliefs around it. We might have different reasons why we're hunting. And it's important to define, what kind of hunter you are, because it really is a deep journey. It's nothing short of life-changing if you really pour yourself in. From there, we're going to talk about, for those of you that are brand new, what can you actually hunt in North America? What are some of your options and why you might want to consider different directions, especially if you're starting out? And then we're going to kind of finish with some really high leverage practices to really start to hone your skills. And for some of you, maybe you don't actually know if you want to hunt or if it's even for you. So part of the coming to the series might be just even exploring, is this something I even want to get into? But in that high leverage practices, these are practices that even if you're not going to hunt, you can start practicing now to develop your skill set. Or if you're working towards hunting, but you don't have your license or you don't know where to hunt yet, then these will be things that you can start working on now in city parks or in multiple different ways to start building the skill set. So when you're ready to start actually hunting, you're actually a little bit further along that journey and ready to go. So that's where we're going to go tonight. And we also have some bonuses that we're going to share at the end, some resources and next steps for you folks to get going. So that's kind of our game plan for tonight now. Maybe just in the chat really quick, can you folks let me know, is the audio sounding okay? Is everything going good so far? Maybe just give me a yes. This also just buys me a second to get a sip of tea. Those of you that know me well also know I'm super passionate about this. And when I get excited, I tend to talk really fast. So if I'm talking too fast, I won't be offended if you put in bold letters, Chris, slow down in the chat. So feel free to bold Chris, slow down in the chat if I'm going too fast for you. It's just because I'm excited, folks. I love this stuff. So I'm going to start off this call the way that I start off a lot of the calls and experiences that I run. And I'm going to start it off with a little bit of gratitude this evening, which is an important part of my practice and my relationship. And, I'm not trying to necessarily influence your practices in your relationship. I respect whatever that is to you, but this is a part of my practice and how I'd like to start this evening off. And I often start off our calls. It's just a good way to bring our minds together. It's often the part that starts to slow me down. Thanks, William. It's the part that starts to slow me right down. So I'd like to just start off by sharing, how thankful I am for the land. And this has become so apparent over the last year and a half dealing with this whole COVID scenario. Man, I don't know where I'd be right now mentally if I didn't have the ability to go and sit by a river, sit by a tree, listen to the birds, take in a breath of fresh air. Man, there's a magic to that that's just so powerful in my life and so grounding. So I'm super thankful for the way that the land and all of those unseen forces support me in life. I'm so thankful to live in an area where we have clean water, where we have relatively clean air to breathe. I'm thankful for all the food that comes from the forest, and we're going to talk about hunting. So I'm super thankful for all of these beings that we build relationships with. And when I think about the species that I target as a hunter, I think about it as building a relationship with that being, and the essence of that being. And they're my teacher, they're my guide. There's something that I share this planet with. And some of them become part of what feeds and nourishes my body, in a healthy way. So I'm super thankful for all of the animals out there as my teachers and my guides in this world. I'm also super thankful for the relationships that I have in this world. And I've got so many of them that have nourished me so much in past times. And Caleb is one of them this past year. I live up in an area called Muskoka. So I'm in central Ontario. And, Caleb and I share one thing in our ancestry, in that both of us have ancestors from over in Scotland. And I know that my ancestors were actually hunters at one time over in Scotland. But all of my ancestors that came across the big ocean and landed here in Canada, they didn't bring that skill set of hunting with them. So I've had to relearn that skill. But through my relationship with Caleb, I've learned so much more about that practice because he comes from this unbroken lineage. His ancestors have been hunting on this land for a really, really long time and been holding relations on this land for a really long time. So I'd also like to just put out some gratitude for the wisdom and knowledge that's held by the first peoples of this land and passed through their ancestry. And then the cross-cultural pollination that happens, the wisdom that comes when people travel from one region to the other, and the sharing that happens between groups. I'm sure if we all shared a little bit about our cultural background here tonight, we'd have some fascinating stories, and we'd have wisdoms coming from every corner of the earth coming in here this evening, if we really broke into those stories. And I'm just really thankful for the diversity in this modern world and the teaching that comes with that. And as I say that, I also just wanted to acknowledge, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this modern world to reconcile some of the damage that's been done and the hurtful things in the past. And one part that we'll address that later on in this course in the hunting world is, thinking about understanding First Nations treaty rights when it comes to hunting and how to hunt in better relation or in right relation with things of that nature. So I'll leave it there, but I just want to kind of extend this blanket gratitude out for this natural world, for relationships, and for everything that supports us. And I'm going to take a short pause here. I'm doing all the talking so far. Don't worry, folks. Caleb's going to be talking lots tonight as well. But maybe I'll just pill it over to Caleb. You want to share anything that you're feeling grateful for tonight? And as I say that, if you want to share in the chat something you're feeling grateful for right now, why don't you jump in the chat and share it? But I'm going to put you on the spot for a second here, Caleb. And then you can pass it back to me.
Aneen, thanks for that. And hello, everybody. I'm very thankful right now for the friends I have that have been helping me prepare this year. I've missed two of our really big times of year in my community. I've missed ricing season, and I'm missing the opening of goose hunting right now because of the work I have to do. We're getting ready to build and move into a complete off-grid home in the next 3 weeks. Solar panel, composting toilet, rain catchment system for our water, all that is happening in about 3 to 3.5 weeks. And so I've been doing a lot of work there, and a lot of my friends have stepped in to help take care of us during that time, helping me get everything done, but also helping me they went out and harvested some rice for me. They went out and actually got some monomen for me to be able to use to seed where I've been seeding monomen, which is where I hunt ducks, doing my stewardship programs, my projects of making the wetlands healthier and happier where I hunt my duck. And so the friends that have gone out and harvested that seed for me to help me take that step, even though I currently could not do it, I'm extremely thankful for that. I'm also very thankful for Air Canada not losing my luggage today. I'm usually over in Hiawatha First Nation, just south of Peterborough, Ontario, and I am currently in the Maritimes. I can't say exactly where. We're working on a documentary, and there's a bunch of other legal jargon I can't get into, but I'm very thankful for Air Canada not losing my luggage, so I'm actually here with clothing that doesn't make me look like a homeless person. that I usually end up looking like when I'm working outside. So that's is the number one things I'm not thankful for: friends and Air Canada doing their job. So that's about all I got for you tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Caleb. So glad you could join us. I know you've had a crazy busy couple of weeks, and it'll be fun when we can reveal to the group what you're doing out east, because Caleb's involved in a really rad, I don't even want to call it a project. That doesn't give it justice, but hopefully we can update you folks later on about it. It's a beautiful cultural experience that he's helping nurture out there. So I'll leave it there for now. So let's kind of dive into tonight's evening then. And I'm going to start with telling a little bit of a story about my journey in hunting, and then I'm going to pass it over to Caleb to talk about his journey. So this first part of the call, we're going to be a little bit, philosophical, you could say, and focus on some of the stories around hunting. But stories are such an important part of hunting as well. It's a huge part of the relationship, and it's a huge part of where the lessons come from. That's how we're going to start off the call. And then the second half of the call is going to be a little bit more like the tactical side of the call, where we kind of talk about actually developing your skill set and how to get things going. So it's so ironic that I'm here teaching this experience with you folks tonight, because I've gone on a journey from actually being an anti-hunting activist in my early 20s. So jump back over 20 years, I was actually brought up in the suburbs. And I already mentioned in my story that my cultural connection to hunting was actually lost sometime before my ancestors traveled over here to what we call Canada today. And because of that, in my family, people didn't really understand what hunting was. We love the outdoors. We love nature. We love wildlife. So it's like, well, why the heck would you go out and shoot something when you love it? And that was kind of the attitude that I started my hunting journey with. And I must admit, simultaneously, like being kind of a new or immigrant family to this country, I also didn't know anything about the ecology. So in hindsight, it was a little bit hypocritical of me to be so judgmental to hunting when I actually knew so little about natural history and human history and relationship with the land, as well as ecology. And I think to a story that really, really changed that for me in my journey. So I was kind of this young radical activist in my 20s, that really cared about the environment and animals and all these things. And I was out in British Columbia actually protesting against some of the logging that was happening. And I had this thing in my heart where I was like really against logging and really against what they were doing. And I actually got in an argument with a logger one day, and he completely ripped a strip off me and made me look like a complete fool in front of this big crowd. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. And even though I still to this day don't necessarily agree with the approach that they were taking to logging, why it was so life impactful is I realized that this logger, he actually cared a lot about the woods and the wildlife that lived there. And on top of that, he knew way more about the ecology of that forest and natural history to me. And every argument he threw at me, I didn't have a thing to say in response other than, I like trees, don't cut them down. Like that was really all I could say. Whereas he was like, well, what species of trees are behind me? And like, what do these need to actually grow and restore? And he just had all this knowledge about how that ecosystem actually naturally grows and how it evolves over hundreds of years and how their forest practices are supposed to work with that. I looked like a complete fool. So that was a really, really humbling moment. And to kind of bring this back to the hunting journey, I mean, that was kind of my approach when I first got into hunting. And it's a common thing I face today when I'm trying to explain to people, and maybe some of you can relate when you're trying to tell friends that you're interested in hunting and they just really don't get it, But hunting to me now, it's about this deep experiences that I have. I've got crazy stories. And, for those of you that stick around for this journey, you'll get to hear a whole bunch of them, being like really, really close to wildlife and things that are, I could almost say are magical in the experiences that I've had out in the woods. And you form these relationships, not only with the ecology of where you live and not only with deer, but you actually get to know individual deer. And then you get to know the kids of their deer. And then you get to know the kids of those kids. And to have that kind of relationship with the place I live, I can't even put it into words. And I know that I'm just getting started on this journey in ways as well. And that's only going to evolve and grow. And what I found is, these relationships in this act of being a conscious part of the food chain and a conscious part of the web of life, going out and actually seeing the results of taking a life and feeding myself and seeing how that impacts things. For me, that's what actually now grounds my philosophy towards environmentalism and stewardship. It allows me to ground truth it and actually really see that give and take between organisms in an ecosystem. So hunting is so much about that story to me now. And it can be really hard to intellectually explain that to somebody that hasn't gone on their own deep connection path. I used to move through the woods like a tourist that was out on a hike, and I thought everything was beautiful. And that's completely changed. And nothing has pushed that journey deeper than hunting. It's not like hiking and watching wildlife. The questions you ask, the experiences that happen, the emotions that come up in you, the way you're challenged, the way you're pushed. It's hard to put into words what that's really all about. I'm going to share just a quick little note here, and then I'm actually going to pass it over to Caleb to share a little bit about his story in hunting, because his story is actually quite different than mine. But one of our guests coming up on the series, I already mentioned, Daniel Vitalis, is coming up in October, and he's got a podcast called Wild Fed. And if you want to make a note of this, maybe Caleb, you can even put this in the chat for people. But Wild Fed podcast, episode 63, Daniel Vitalis interviews this guy, Mark Elbrock, and he's known as like one of the top trackers in North America, and I want to say kind of academic tracking today, and also very like on the ground tracking science and biology. He's authored tons of books, a fascinating guy. But in this podcast, he does this beautiful history of kind of where modern hunting, stewardship, and conservation practices have come from. And if you want to learn to hunt, it would be really good to listen to this and understand why things are the way today, at least from Mark's perspective. But in it, he references the work of this man named Stephen Keller, who did a huge amount of research on, you folks will see there, Caleb just put it in there in the podcast, or sorry, in the chat. He did a huge amount of research, this guy, Stephen Keller, on hunters and anti-hunters and what their relationship and knowledge of the land was. And ironically, something that came out of this research, he kind of came up with these three different types or categories of hunters, and he called them naturalistic hunters. And then he had dominionistic hunters. And then there was another, utilitarian hunters. And the idea was utilitarian hunters were literally just about going out and harvesting food. Dominionistic hunters come from that ground that man over nature. And we're out there to harvest animals for trophies, and we don't necessarily keep the food, and it's actually a sport and it's a competition. And then the naturalistic hunters were the people that actually saw it more of a spiritual practice and relationship, whatever that means to them. So long story short, where he goes with this, another part of his study is he starts drilling the naturalist and natural history knowledge of these different groups, but he also pulls that in people that are anti-hunters and politicians that are against hunting. And what he actually found is that both the dominionistic hunters and the anti-hunters had the lowest level of naturalist knowledge and understanding of naturalist history and ecology, according to the study. And obviously this is one study, but it was quite an in-depth one. But the people that were naturalistic hunters actually had the same level of knowledge or on par with wildlife biologists and people that actually worked in conservation for a living in their understanding of the land. And I thought that was really, really fascinating. And I really, really resonated that. So when I think about the hunter's journey, it's about so much more to me than just going out and harvesting meat. I mean, I am a utilitarian hunter. I hunt for food and I strive to feed my family with as much food as I can from the land. But I very much resonate with this idea of the naturalistic hunter as well. And it's about this relationship with the land and this relationship with our bioregion. So I want to share a little bit more about that story in a bit, but I'm going to pass it over to Caleb right now, because Caleb has a lot of interesting insights on kind of the rich history between people and wildlife, as well as hunting here on this land in what we call North America today. So I'm going to pass it to Caleb, let him introduce himself, and then just speak a little bit about this longer term perspective on our relationship with the land. And knowing that people have been hunting these lands for thousands of years and the wildlife are still here, some of them in larger numbers than they were hundreds of years ago, even thousands of years ago. So I'll pass it over there to Case right now. And Victor, just to answer that, I don't have a link to the study, Victor, but if you pull up that podcast, episode 68, you'll have to scroll back in the chat. You can get the information. Stephen Keller is the name, and I'm sure you can do a little bit of searching and find the actual study. Sorry, Caleb, pass it back to you.
No worries. Yeah, so my name is Caleb Musgrave. I'm from Hiawatha First Nation, or Mississauga Anishinaabe man from the Crane clan, and I am a woodsman. I've been growing up. I grew up in the bush. I grew up learning everything from my father, my granny, my uncles, everybody I could. And hunting was just always there. It never wasn't part of our lives. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was our identity, but it was part of something that was just unquestioned. We never had to ask, why do we hunt? Why do we do this? Why do we do it this way? The ethics behind that never was really a thought, because it was just the way it was. My earliest memories of food was frog legs from the bush and wild ducks that my grandfather sent us, because my father was working away from where my family usually hunted. And so we lived about 5 hours away from our homeland. And so my grandfather would send meat, fresh meat to us, well, fresh game meat. And that was just part of our lives. Like, okay, we're going to sit down tonight and have lasagna. And tomorrow night it's going to be duck. And the next night it's going to be burgers. And the next night it's going to be moose steak. And it's just part of the diet, part of the lives that we lived. And so it wasn't ever questioned. It was like, even my sister, who didn't actually like the taste of game meat because of how my father cooked it, frankly, was never opposed to it. She never had that idea of hunting as evil, hunting as something that's not necessary, it's obsolete, it's a archaic form of whatever opinions people may have. That was just never part of our perspective until I got into my 20s. I was out teaching a bunch of stuff, teaching bushcraft skills to a lot of folks. And I said, yeah, I just came back from deer hunting. We just got a deer actually not too far from here. And one of our customers, one of our students said, so why'd you kill it? Because I was talking about how beautiful this animal was. And he was a big deer. He was in every way, shape, or form this amazing animal. And I loved that deer. And I killed them. I killed him. And that question has never been in my mind ever in the first 21 years of my life. Why'd you kill it? Because it's food. That animal gave themselves to me. It's part of what we do. It's part of our relationship with the land. And those questions never were asked by me. And I felt like I was actually, frankly, a fool for that. Like, how can I not question something? I question my faith. I question my politics. I question my preferences of video games or whatever else is in my life. I question that stuff all the time. I was never questioning hunting. And so I went into this deep introspection for about 3 years. And I actually dialed back on how much I was hunting during that time, because I didn't want to do something I didn't fully understand. And as I went along with that, I realized how important hunting was to me, how important hunting was to my heritage and my culture, and to my people's sovereignty on many levels. Self-determination starts with your diet. You can control so much of your life by what you consume. And so those kind of perspectives started to come into my mind, and it started to broaden my perspective. And then I started to meet people who didn't share that perspective, but they were willing to listen. And so I started taking them out with me. They were non-native, or sometimes they were indigenous, but they were non-hunters. And they would come out into a duck blind with me, and they would watch how much attention I was spending on just observing the entire environment, talking about like, oh, that water quality is not that great. The ducks aren't going to have a good life here. We need to fix that. And they would observe that and be like, wow, you really do care. And it actually encouraged about, I'd say at this point, over a dozen people to get into hunting. I don't want to say that was just me, but I was definitely encouraging them, and I supported them. I took them on a lot of their first hunts, and some of them have had very successful hunts since then. And it made me dive deeper and deeper. Like, okay, why do these people not know anything about hunting? Why is this cultural separation happening in the world? Every culture from the entire world has some relationship to wild food in one form or another. And so as I expanded my horizons, became an anthropologist, it dawned on me that I need to really understand our entire relationship with our food, both plants, but also animals and fungi and everything else. And so, yeah, I dove in and I studied, and I learned a lot. And I would like to say we, because I shared a lot of this learning with a lot of other people, and we experienced it together. It wasn't just me building up all this information. It was a lot of people getting involved. A lot of my mentors, a lot of my students, a lot of my friends and colleagues and hunting buddies, just like Chris. And this relationship that goes back, there's an ethnographer in the 1500s who wasn't always the most accurate person because he didn't go deep into the interior of North America. He went to about New England, and about that's as far as he got. And his name was Verrazano. And Verrazano was an Italian man who was living along the coastline and studying the indigenous peoples who were there, Wampanoag, Narragansett, Passamaquoddy, everybody, but also learning about the interior. And he was going fairly deep into New England, not getting as far as like Pennsylvania by any means, but definitely into the interior by a few hundred kilometers. And there was multiple things that he observed. First off, how the entire landscape was a park-like, estate-like environment. There was no wilderness on the East Coast. It wasn't what we would consider now wilderness. It wasn't uninhabited. It was very heavily inhabited. Some estimates as high as 100 million people in North America alone. Just North America, 100. At the same time, Europe had 67 million. So a lot of people were in this continent. But also, the landscape itself was not just a disheveled, overgrown landscape like they were used to in northern Europe, as well as in the interior of Eastern Europe. It was open country with big old growth trees that were broad and healthy, and everything seemed to be miraculously edible, as if this was a Garden of Eden. And even Verrazano realized the indigenous people were stewarding this landscape and encouraging this shrub and encouraging this plant to grow and giving them what they need to keep growing bigger and healthier and produce more food. A lot of us like to think of this landscape as wild and untouched. It was heavily touched. It was heavily influenced by human nature. We terraformed North America as an Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Ganya, everybody who was indigenous to this landscape changed how this landscape looked. There are certain animals now that depend on human interaction or human intervention to continue. The purple martin is a great example of that. A creature of a sincere concern on the endangered species list because of how low their populations have crashed, of course, due to DDT and everything else. But even before then, because the indigenous populace that was around was hanging gourds from trees to dry, and they would have cut a hole in it to allow the airflow in and let the seeds dry and be shaken out. And the hole was just big enough for the purple martin to build a nest inside. And they lost their ability to use hollow trees. That's how long our relationship with this landscape has been around, that we taught a bird to stop living in wild habitat. An entire species became dependent on gourds being hung from trees. That's how much involvement we have had with our landscape. And it goes beyond that. The Black Oak Savanna ecosystem, which used to be one of the largest savannas east of the Mississippi, spanned from Peterborough, Ontario, all the way down to Texas. There is less than 2% of it left in North America because it was human created, and animals and plants turned into part of this landscape. They became dependent on that prairie ecology. And why did we make that prairie ecology? Because when you burn the brush back, it's easier to shoot an arrow or an atlatl dart through open country at the animals that are coming out for the new succulent growth. It wasn't just because we wanted to help the environment, it's because we wanted to help ourselves as well. Everything we do as indigenous people is to benefit us without detrimenting the environment around us. It's always a relationship that we have to have, whether it's with the plants, the animals, the trees, the fungi, plants, the animals, the trees are a plant. You can tell if I haven't had a lot of coffee today. The fauna, the flora, and the fungi, all those families, all those kingdoms, but also just the landscape itself. We changed everything around us for the better in many ways. Sometimes you could argue that it may not have been for the better, but those animals became dependent on that ecology because we hunted, because we harvested food from that landscape, because we depended on this landscape, and we understood that we were not independent. It wasn't living off the land, it was living on the land. It was living with the land. And that becomes part of how that whole world works. And so this whole journey of mine has got me to this point where 7 years ago, I realized I need to be an ecologist if I want to be able to justify me hunting. I have to care about every single level of life on this planet, not just where I live, but everywhere. If I want to be able to justify hunting, if I want to continue part of what's part of my traditions and my heritage, I have to be able to justify that by caring and giving more than I take from the environment. And so we expand ecology as much as possible with our crew of friends and hunting partners and everybody else. We're expanding wetland habitat and putting in more wild rice and putting in better duck habitat and putting in better bird habitat in general. And we're clearing out the overgrown cedar trees that would have never happened in nature and would have never happened in the old ecology of this landscape. We clear those cedars into smaller islands, remove all that deadfall, which would have become a fire hazard if we didn't. And now we're seeing one of the first years after we began clearing cedars, I got to watch a red squirrel stand on a tree and scream his head off at me with all the vitriol that a red squirrel screams at a person who's bothering his day. And in a forest that was so thick I couldn't see through it a year before, I watched a Cooper's hawk take that red squirrel and fly through the trees with that red squirrel. There was no way a Cooper's hawk would have been there a year before. There was no way that there would be now screech owls living in that forest as they are now. We're seeing an increase in plant ecology. We're seeing an increase in animal ecology. Everything is benefiting because a handful of hunters said, hey, let's clear out some of these cedar trees because it's not doing well for the environment anymore. It's just choking itself out. And now we're seeing elm trees and maple trees and all this happening. Humans have always been part of the landscape. It is very arrogant to declare us separate. And I find that anything that separates us from that landscape, although we may think it ethically good, it may not be sustainable or right. I feel like we need to be more connected to our landscape, and that includes through our diets. And there's a lot of benefit there for everybody. It's a healthier way to live for us, for the animals, for the ecology, for the ecosystems, for everything, the world, by just learning how to live a good life with that landscape. And part of that can be, doesn't have to be, but it can be through hunting because of what we can accomplish as a species. I ranted a lot there, didn't I, Chris? I'm going to pass it back to you. Thanks for letting me scream at you all, folks.
No, that was beautiful, Caleb. Thanks so much, man. For anyone that doesn't know, Caleb listens to heavy metal, and I love to throw this at him once in a while and be like, dude, you're really articulate for a metalhead. So that's always my running joke there. So we're gonna transition shortly here to kind of part 2 of the call, and we are going to take a quick break in there. So if you need to go to the washroom or grab a drink, just hold on give us another kind of like 10 minutes here. We're going to do a little short break. And then we will kind of move into part 2, where we're going to dive into like some practical next steps for you folks to kind of help you out in developing your skills and getting started. But before we go there, I mentioned I just want to finish off the story that I started telling you folks about myself getting into the hunting in this realm. So when I finally decided that I wanted hunting to be part of my journey and that I wasn't, an anti-hunting activist anymore, it came because I started meeting people that had a different philosophy. And I realized that I had a lot of assumptions and preconceived notions around hunting what it was. I had this stereotypical like redneck trophy hunter kind of in my head is like what hunting is, and people not caring. And like that logger humbled me. My wife's stepfather humbled me when I met him and realized that, you could probably still stereotype him as a redneck, but he actually had a real deep relationship with the land as well and cared a lot and knew a lot. And it was very humbling. And for whatever reason, in my head, I decided that bow hunting was more ethical than gun hunting. So I was only going to bow hunt. And that was my thing. And I was just very against guns when I started hunting. But so I was going to start bow hunting. I went on this incredible 5-year-long journey from carving my first bow. I wanted to make a bow myself. So I went out on the land and I harvested a tree and I cut it into a stave and I dried it for 8 months. I carved into a bow. And I had been practicing a lot of skills at that point, and thought, I had a really good shot at archery. And I'm like, great, I'm going to go out and get my first deer this year. This is so exciting. And I even was cocky enough to tell a friend, hey, I'm bringing venison for Thanksgiving dinner this year, my first season. I actually remember saying that to him, like, I'm going to bring venison. So 5 years later, I was able to finally bring venison to that party. And I realized how little I actually knew, and how just because I knew a lot about deer intellectually, I didn't actually really know anything about what their lives look like 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and that they move different every season of the year. Their movement is different every day depending on the weather. Their movement is different every day depending on where the wolves are today. Their movement is different depending on who the dominant buck is in the region at that time. All of those things affect the movement of deer. And to really hunt in this kind of almost like an artist in this deep relational way means getting to know those incredible relationships between weather and animals and seasons and different species and the hierarchical structure between those species. All of those affect the way that you're going to hunt any one given area and how you're going to hunt. And it's such a beautiful relationship to actually start growing. I had no idea there was that level of depth of knowledge in to be gleaned from the world of hunting. And that's why I say it's been nothing short of life-changing for me. So to make kind of a long story short, I just want to share 5 years later, I harvested my first deer. I harvested it with a bow that I shot, or a bow that I carved myself. And I'm not going to tell that story right now, but it was a really beautiful, really emotional experience. And I actually felt kind of shooken up afterwards, like, oh my goodness, I just killed something. And I kind of wondered, like, man, are the deer around here going to like hate me now? Like, and the year after, the summer after I harvested that deer, I was hanging out in this forest one day and I was moving in this really peaceful, slow way. And I had these two bucks that I'd never seen before. I had just spent a whole fall sitting out in this forest. I actually spent 5 years in this forest. And I never saw more than one or two bucks. I almost always just saw does. And my first deer actually was a doe. So the summer after I harvest my first deer, I'm sitting out in the woods and I see these two beautiful bucks off in the distance. And I'm like, whoa, there are bucks here. Huh, that's interesting. How did I sit here for 5 years and never even see them? There's a good question right now. What do I need to learn to start seeing the bucks and not just the does? And these two bucks walked right up to me, like literally within like 15 feet away. And they just sat there looking at me. And it was this like mad, they still had the beautiful green velvet on their antlers. It was this gorgeous experience. And I had this moment being like, okay, I took a deer from here, but like the deer are okay here and the deer don't hate me. These bucks just came over and said hello. And then now I actually know there's deer that are living here that I don't even know are living here. I'm like, wow, I want to get to know this place so much better. I need to really up my game. And around that same time, up until that point, I was really only hunting with a couple of buddies and we were all kind of beginners. And that's when I started looking for mentors that have been doing this longer and started kind of building my network of people that were hunting. And it was amazing now because we come together like with folks like Caleb. And at the end of the hunt, we'd share our stories. And then we'd say, okay, well, this is what happened. And I didn't get a shot. Why do you think the deer did that, Caleb? And then Caleb will share his thought and be like, oh, I had that happen once before. Or, oh yeah, no, well, you don't know about this. And then they'll tell me about this. And suddenly the learning curve went from like this slow grind to just like this exponential build in relationship. And after I shot my first deer, I harvested a deer every single year for the next 6 years after that. It was amazing to go from 5 years with nothing to every single season. And I don't want to carry on in the story too much longer, but I would like to get to a very intentional point with it that just speaks to the relationship with it, about it being so much more about utilitarian. And this kind of borders on the naturalistic side of it. 3 seasons ago, I had a bit of an episode with Lyme disease. It's something that's come up in my life a couple of times. I got bit by a tick back in 2007 in New Jersey. It's impacted my life drastically. And 3 seasons ago, I was super, super sick in the fall. Like could barely get out of bed, couldn't hold down a job, wasn't going to hunt. Like I just felt awful. I felt like my whole life was falling apart. And, you know, one of my buddies, he kind of actually said this in a bit of a redneck kind of way, but he actually said to me, he's like, hey, Chris, you know what I think? Because I was working with doctors, nothing was working. I was just getting sicker. And my buddy said, hey, Chris, I think you need to kill a deer. I think that's what's going to get you out of this. This is what my one buddy says the one day. And I just kind of like laughed and like, okay, whatever, man, I got to go. I'm not feeling well. But that next morning I was like, all right, I'm going hunting. And I set my alarm for like 6 a.m. to get up. And then I barely slept that night. I woke up feeling awful and I went back to bed. I'm just like, I can't do it. I'm too sick. I'm too weak. I don't even know if I can climb a tree. So I went back to sleep that morning, woke up around 9 o'clock. And usually I'm always in the woods long before 9 a.m. And then I was like, oh, I missed my window. I'm not going to go. And then I just kind of heard my buddy's voice. And I'm like, no, you need to go, man. This is part of your story. This is part of who you are. Go hunting today. So I forced myself to get dressed. I walk or I drive to the spot where I'm going to go hunt. And I say a little bit of a prayer before going out. And I basically said, like, man, I'm weak. Like, and I've had some really epic adventures that ended up with me needing to track an animal all day long and then carry it back over a long distance. These very, very physical, emotional, intense hunting experiences. And I said a prayer that morning, just to say, like, I don't have that in me right now. So please don't let that be what happens today. And I'm just here to heal right now. And so I walk up the hill and I get to my tree. I'm a little bit nervous, even climbing, that I'm maybe going to fall out of the tree. Like, I feel super weak and super sick. And I sit down in the tree. I make so much noise. I didn't do anything for scent control. I didn't even think about the wind that day. And I'm sitting there about half an hour. And all of a sudden, this family of deer, these 5 does, walk up the hill and they walk right in front of me. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, am I going to take the shot? I don't know if I can do this. So I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to take the shot. And then they just stop and they're just standing in front of me. And I'm like, holy cow. Okay, I'm going to take the shot. And I'm like, okay, well, which would be the best one to harvest? Thinking from a stewardship perspective. So I take this shot. And, almost every other time I've harvested a deer, I've shot and the animal will run first and then it'll lay down somewhere else in the distance. And then I have to go track. But on this occasion, I shoot and she literally takes one jump and she lays down. All the other deer kind of jump and then they stop and they see that she lays down. And I'll warn you, the story is a little bit intense if you haven't taken a life before. But the 4 other deer walk back in and they lay down with her. And there's this like surreal, sad, intense moment, but there's also like this beautiful sunny day and the birds are singing. And I'm just sitting there and I watch her die. I'm up in the tree super sick and I literally just start bawling, like crying. And for about half an hour, they all sit together. And then the 4 deer stand up and they get in a line and they literally walk underneath me in the tree, one by one, go just off in the distance behind me and they go back to feeding. They just start eating again. And it's just like the most beautiful moment I can imagine. And there's this deer. She's just sitting there on the ground. No work. I call a buddy. He comes, pulls it out of the woods for me. And, I don't know about the magic and I'm sure there's some other variables, but that was the start of me coming back into my health again. So I got one more piece to the story that I want to add that's really, really important. And I'm going to jump forward a year later. Last year, we ran the Hunter's Journey course for the first time. So this was a paid course and mentorship that Caleb and I run, and we had a bunch of enrolled students. And this is so ironic. The first year that I run this course is the first year in like 7 or 8 years that I don't harvest a deer. It's like the whatever, I'm not, I won't go there, but there was a trickster involved in my life that year, talk about humility. Nature's got this beautiful way of humbling us when we things start going to our head. So we run this course. And the whole season goes by and I haven't harvested a deer yet. And I'm starting to be like frustrated. My ego's kicking in. Oh my God, I'm teaching this course and I can't even get my own deer this year. And so it's the very, very last day of the hunting season. It's December 15th. And I'm like, okay, this is my last chance. And we literally had our last call that evening for our paid class, the Hunter's Journey. And I go out and I'm like, okay, this is my chance. I'm going to get my deer tonight. I'm going to go and tell my course I got my deer. And then we can celebrate everything I learned and yada, yada, yada. And I climb up the tree and, I sit there for like 3 hours, don't see a thing. Just as the last light's coming, sure enough, doesn't the same family of deer that I harvested that deer from the year before, 2 years before that when I was sick, the same family of does start coming up, except now there's 2 young ones in there, fawns from that year that weren't born that time before. And 2 of the other deers in that group were the young fawns that year when I harvested that deer, and they're still alive. And then one of the sisters is there as well. So these deer come walking up the hill. And I had another one of those moments where it brought me back to that experience where I was so sick in that tree and how that was such a healing experience for me. And I started crying again up in this tree. And I was just like, I'm not going to take a shot right now. Like, how could I take a shot right now? This is so beautiful. That these deer just showed up again. And one of the things that was huge for me is it was this massive epiphany around how this relationship with hunting was about so much more than just harvesting food. And it was also beautiful to know that deer family was still healthy on the land, even though I harvested one 2 years later. And in that moment, from a stewardship perspective, I could have justified taking one of them. There was lots of deer on that land. But in that moment, I'm like, no, this is about more than that for me. I'm not going to take a shot right now. And I'm just going to accept that I didn't get a deer this year. and the lessons that come around with that. And, maybe going into this new journey of being an instructor, a little bit of humility is actually really good for me right now. So there's a story for you about my relationship with hunting and about how it's about so much more than just harvesting food, although that is something that I strive to do. So what I'd like to do, we are going to break in a couple of minutes, as I shared, but what I want to do right now is actually do a little bit of a journal activity. So hopefully you folks have a piece of paper and a pen nearby you right now. And if you don't, then you can grab one, or you can just go through it in your head. But I think it's really important. I went into the season or into my hunting journey thinking I'm never going to hunt with a gun. I'm only going to hunt with a bow. I hunt with everything now. Bow hunting is still where my passion and my heart is. But I hunt birds with a shotgun now. I hunt deer and moose with a rifle. My thoughts and who I am as a hunter has really evolved. And I think if you're going to go out there, it's important to think a little bit about, what kind of hunter are you? What's your unique story? And it's going to be different than mine. It's going to be different than Caleb's. It's your own unique journey into this realm of hunting. So take a second. I'm going to post 3 questions in the chat here, and we'll just take a few minutes here, maybe even like 3 or 4 minutes. We're going to say one last little piece to wrap this. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back in on the, I'll call this the tactical side of the class. So the second part of this class, we're going to talk about getting started in hunting and learning to hunt, and what you folks can actually take away from tonight's class beyond the philosophical side, from a practical step side. But the 3 questions I'm going to ask you are: 1, why do you want to hunt in the first place? So why is it that hunting is part of you? Why do you want it to be part of your journey? Question number 2 is: what kind of hunter do you want to be? What is your story with hunting? What kind of hunter do you want to be? And you don't have to box yourself, but remember I mentioned the utilitarian, the naturalistic, the dominionistic. Those are 3 examples, but there's a million more stories with hunting. So what kind of hunter are you? And then the last one is: what would it mean to you to be able to actually feed your family and your community with your own hands and in a sustainable way from the land? What would that actually mean to you to be able to do that? So those are the 3 questions I'm going to pose right now. And we'll just take a couple of minutes for folks to kind of sit with those. I'll write those in the chat. I just posted the questions in the chat if folks need a refresh there. And we'll come back together in a minute just to wrap this piece, take our break, and then we'll go into part 2. So I know that's not a lot of time for just like hitting you with these big philosophical questions. And for some of you, they might be really simple answers and straightforward. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. For others, they might be really deep questions. Maybe you don't know why you want to hunt, and that's why you're here. Maybe you're like Caleb, where you've at one point in your life, you actually questioned that idea for a bit, and it took you on a journey. So yeah, you've got lots of time to reflect on those. For those that stick around to the end of tonight, I'm going to share a link to where you can go and download a more in-depth journaling exercise around kind of crafting your story as a hunter. So I'll share those at the end of the night. So last piece here, as I said, we're going to take a break. Actually, that works out perfect for timing. We're going to break at about 9 o'clock. And then we'll break for, maybe about 8 minutes or so. And then we'll come back together and we'll get into the tactical side. So I did mention something that I do want to do here. So those of you, again, that have been following me for a bit, I do all kinds of free experiences in the fall and the winter. I run this whole series called Nature Calls, where I bring on different naturalists and we do nature mentoring online. And I love doing this free stuff. I always try to make sure they're a ton of value on their own. But I also, I said this at the beginning and I'm not hiding anything, part of doing the free stuff is also trying to promote how I make a living, which is as a mentor and teaching people. So Caleb and I do have a paid course, and I just want to take a minute to let you folks know kind of what's coming up with it. So the course that we run is called The Hunter's Journey. And, one thing I shared at the beginning, one of the biggest barriers to learning how to hunt is often getting started when your cultural lineage with hunting has been broken, when you don't have mentors in your family. And for myself, I didn't have anyone to mentor me. And because of that loss of culture and not having a community around it, it just didn't feel accessible. I didn't have a clue to start. And then when I did start, it was a lot of really questioning what I was doing. And a big question I had is is this even sustainable? Can I even hunt here? Because, depending on where you live, there might be animals, there probably are animals in your region that aren't sustainable to hunt where you live. And that it actually would not be a steward, even though maybe you can legally hunt them, you might not be a steward to be hunting them, So there's a lot of big questions that come up. And for myself, when it really started to shift is when I started to find mentors and a community to actually support me on that journey. So what we're really trying to do is kind of create a collective of instructors and students that share similar values, this idea of hunting with heart or heart-centered hunting, people who care about stewardship, people who are in this for their own relationship with the land, and people who also want to get really effective at it and increase their own self-reliance and be able to bring home food to feed their family, people that want to be part of the food chain in a meaningful and sustainable way. So we've created this course, myself and Caleb, we're the two main instructors, but we also have a bunch of guest instructors as well. We've created a course in an online community called The Hunter's Journey. And our goal is to take you from wherever you are right now in your journey. So whether you're totally new, live in the city and don't have a clue how to get started, or maybe you've been hunting for a couple of years and maybe you've been successful, maybe you haven't, but you're realizing now how much there is to actually learn and what a learning curve it is. We want to basically walk you through kind of each step of the way and get you to that point of feeling super empowered that hey, this makes sense. I know what I'm doing and I know I'm doing it in a sustainable way. And the way that this course basically works, it's a year-long course. It basically runs throughout the year. And we have regular small group sessions online where we meet and we answer questions, we do case studies, you get to know the other students, you actually get to chat with me and Caleb one-on-one and interact and our other instructors. But then we also have this massive online database we're building of tactical skill videos. So everything from how do you butcher a deer to how do you build a blind for a tree? How do you choose what firearm to buy or what bow to buy? So we're building out this massive database of material to walk you through all those, and then also creating the community aspect through these coaching calls. So anyways, if this appeals to you and you're looking for a next step, if you want a mentor, if you want a community, if you jive with me and Caleb, then I'd like to invite you to join our next cohort that's basically starting now. And we're going to be running classes twice a month between now and the end of December. And then we're going to run them once a month through the winter, January, February, March. And then in the spring, during the spring hunt for turkey, for bird, for bear, we're going to start up 2 nights again. So I'm going to pass it over just in case, Caleb, I want to let people break here, Caleb, in a moment. So if you want to say anything, you can. Caleb just put the link down there. It's thehuntersjourney.com. And we have a $100 off coupon code for anyone that wants to join us tonight. First, I'll say, if you were referred here we have a couple of people that are helping us promote it. For example, the team at Original Wisdom, Kersey and Sandy and Cal from Original Wisdom, Steve Leckman, maybe you came here through Daniel Vitalis's email list. Maybe it's through Preston Taylor, Tracker Longbows, Earth Tracks, Alexis Burnett. If any of them gave you a coupon code, please use their coupon code. Because if you use their coupon code, we're actually going to kick them back a little bit to help their projects. So if someone gave you a coupon code to get here, use theirs. And if you don't have a coupon code, then you can enter HWH, so Hunting with Heart, HWH 100, and we'll give you $100 off joining us in the Hunter's Journey. So huntersjourney.com and HWH 100 get you $100 off. Caleb, do you want to share anything else, or do you think I covered it? And then we're going to take a short break.
You covered quite a bit. I don't think I can really add anything to that subject of like, the Hunter's Journey is an amazing program. I'm often the guy that's looked at as like skeptical on updated, like new technology kind of learning. And I am through the roof about this. I am so excited about this course. So if I'm excited, you should be excited, because this is not the things I like to do, and I'm loving this. So be excited. Join us. It's a really cool project. In one way or another, you're going to learn a lot from one direction or another. You're going to enjoy a lot of what we're doing. It's going to be quite exciting. I'm just rambling now, so I'm just going to sign off.
Awesome. Thanks, Caleb. Why don't we take, it's 9:03 on my time. Let's come back at 9:10. And I would encourage you to go outside for at least a couple minutes of this break. Take a deep breath, quiet your mind, feel the breeze, check out the night sky, recharge. Remember that you're in nature right now. You're part of nature right now. And then let's come back at 9:10. And then we'll probably do about 20 minutes more. So we'll try and be done before 9:30. And we're going to get into some kind of practical next steps for you outside of the course. So what are things you can start working on right now in your hunting journey? Find us. Well, to those folks that have joined us midway through this, I am going to be posting this video publicly. So if you don't want your video showing up in the public video, you can scroll down and hit stop video right now. All right, over to you, Caleb. Take it away, bud.
Hello again, everybody. So the first thing we want to kind of go over is, what can you hunt? Here in North America, there is a broad spectrum of wildlife that can be hunted. I'm just going to close the chat real quickly because I'm kind of like a dog. Every time I see something shiny or move, I want to chase it. I'm going to close the chat for a second. There's a lot of species that are available for us to legally take as game animals for food. There is a whole plethora of them. There's even some that are not considered game animals because they are an invasive species or what's sometimes categorized in certain regions as varmint. One of those being, of course, feral hog in the United States and some provinces in Canada. But the majority of the animals that we hunt are native species. And one of them, obvious categories, are your big game animals, which are usually your cervids. Here in Canada and most of North America, when we talk about big game, we're usually, not always, but usually talking about cervids. Cervids being your deer family. So white-tailed deer, black-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose. And of course, up north, caribou, and certain areas, you got also Sitka deer, and a bunch of other subspecies all over the place. Other big game that can come up are, of course, muskox and bison. Those are two very well-known big game animals across North America. Some have very large population crashes because of A, habitat loss, but B, overhunting in the market era of hunting. So there's market hunting back up into the 1800s and into the 1900s. There was something called market hunting, where people were actually killing large game animals to produce food for people furthering their journey west. Buffalo tongue was a very common one, bison tongue. And so a lot of those populations have crashed, though they are starting to come back up. And there's certain areas where you can hunt them once more because their numbers are healthy enough to take a certain amount of species. Other big game that are sometimes brought up are the sheep family. So Dall sheep, bighorn sheep, all those kinds of animals up in the mountains of Western Canada, the Western United States, and of course, the Pacific Northwest of Alaska. You also have bear in that category. In some areas you can hunt brown bear, other areas you can hunt black bear. And up until the 90s, black bear were actually categorized as small game animal in Ontario, which is a strange little factoid for you, a little piece of trivia. Up until the 1990s, black bear were considered a small game animal. They aren't that small to me, but okay, I'll go with that for a moment. Touching on small game, we have a few other categories of animals. We have, of course, the rabbit family. You have hares, rabbits, lagomorphs in general. Here in Ontario, we have cottontail. We have the occasional jackrabbits, often referred to as swamp jacks. They're really big jackrabbits that live in swampland ecosystems. They're part of the cottontail rabbit family. We also have the varying hare, also known as the snowshoe hare. That's the rabbit family that is mostly in North America. There's also, of course, the desert jackrabbits and a lot of other lagomorphs across the Americas. And beyond that, we also have squirrel. Squirrel is actually one of my favorite animals to hunt. It's probably the first, other than goose hunting, it's the first animal that I hunt every year. They're competing with me for acorns, so I know exactly where they are. And they are very, acrobatic animals. So it's actually quite challenging to get a shot on these animals, whether it be with a bow or even with a firearm. It can be very challenging to get a good shot. And it's one of those animals that a lot of people start their hunting journey with is small game hunting, especially squirrel. My good friend Gerardo Deer, green deer, he's down in Six Nations, he's Cayuga, and him and I've had a lot of talks about how growing up as Indigenous men, that's the first animal you're hunting, and you learn to stalk on squirrel rather than learning on a deer or a moose or the other so-called romantic hunts that people always kind of picture and fantasize about in their heads. To us, squirrel hunting is one of the first styles of hunting that we begin with. And it's a very good meat. A lot of people will turn their nose up when you say that you're going to feed them some squirrel, but it's actually a very good tasting meat, whether it be from a gray squirrel, fox squirrel, and of course the red squirrels, though in Ontario and much of Canada, they're considered a fur-bearing mammal. You need to be a trapper if you want to catch red squirrel. You can't use a Ontario hunting license to catch a red squirrel. Beyond that, you also have upland game bird. So spruce grouse, ruffed grouse, sharp-tailed grouse. You also have woodcocks. You also have pheasant in some areas. You also have the Hungarian gray partridge that has been introduced into the Americas in the last century or so. And they've become kind of naturalized. Some people consider them an invasive. They're not overly invasive from my experiences, but they are an animal on the landscape that you can also hunt. Pheasant are a little, at least in my neck of the woods, a lot less common because they don't handle the extreme cold of winter that many other game birds can. You also have quail in that category. You have the native bobwhites and mountain quail of the western states and provinces, but you also have Coturnix quail and other non-native varieties that have been released into the wild that can be found once in a while when you're out hunting. These are a lot of your upland game birds. Another category of bird, of course, is turkey, the wild turkey. Many of us have seen a wild turkey in the outdoors. They look a lot like a normal domestic turkey, though they are usually almost exclusively the bronze coloring. Only when you get a domestic turkey that's broken into the wild and actually joins up with a flock and mates do you start seeing the other colors of turkey start showing up in the wild. But wild turkey are a very large game bird that produces a good amount of meat, and they're quite tasty. And very different than your domestic turkey in taste and texture and just how the bird is. A lot of people often refer to turkeys as these foolish birds that we all joke about with farmers and stuff, having to deal with them looking up and drowning because they won't close their mouth when it's raining. That is not a wild turkey whatsoever. They are extremely intelligent birds, extremely cautious birds. They're one of the more challenging animals to hunt in North America is the wild turkey because they have very sharp eyes that can see almost any glimmer. Like if I was wearing my glasses turkey hunting, they probably saw me. And then that brings us to migratory game bird. And the majority of migratory game bird are your waterfowl. Not always. The woodcock and a few other game birds are actually migratory birds as well, such as mourning doves. They do actually migrate, though very shortly, and woodcocks even do migrate quite far. And they are migratory game birds, but the majority of migratory game birds are your ducks and geese, and in some areas, sandhill crane, other areas, there's the occasional swan hunt. But for the most part, when we talk about migratory game birds, most people are talking about ducks, geese, and other types of waterfowl. These animals, all of them, can provide a great deal amount of meat that can help sustain you for long periods. For many years, I went 60% of my protein from the wild, and then another 20% from what I could raise, and the other 20% whenever I was like in town with friends and they made a dinner, or we went out for dinner, or I was craving Wendy's at some point. So there is the occasional, there's the very real possibility that you can sustain yourself on wild food when you're hunting in North America, whether you're in the American Southeast, the American Southwest, the American West, the Canada West, Canada North, Canada Northeast, etc. There's a lot of options for animals to hunt. There's even other ones. I didn't mention one very famous upland game bird, the ptarmigan. The ptarmigan is a white willow grouse, is what some people refer to them as. And they are a beautiful bird that is very challenging to hunt in the colder parts of the year because they are perfectly camouflaged into that snowscape, just like a ruffed grouse will be in their hardwoods and a spruce grouse in the spruce forest. And it's really amazing how much options and how much variety there is to hunt. There can actually be sometimes challenges like, oh, I kind of want to go, it's deer hunting season right now, but I can hear those geese in the field. Man, I wish I had my shotgun and my goose load, because you can go and bag a few geese, and the seasons are constantly transitioning over each other. And that's another benefit, is the amount of food that can be harvested. In Ontario, the daily bag limit for Canada geese is between 6 and 7 birds. It fluctuates every couple of years. They change that. 6 to 7 geese a day can be caught. And that's a lot of meat. Each bird can produce about 4 to 5 pounds of meat. So in a single day, you can bring in well over 20 pounds of goose meat per person on a hunt. And then you add that for Canada geese, the possession limit, as in the amount of birds you have in your freezer, for Canada geese alone is 100 birds. And that's across Canada. That's not just for Ontario, because in Canada, the game bird laws, the migratory game bird laws, are under the Federal Migratory Game Bird Act, which is part of a relationship with the United States and Mexico to manage our wildlife that migrate across all 3 countries. When it comes down to all these animals, there's going to be bag limits, and that's going to tell you how many of a certain species you can take. And there's going to be daily bag limits, and there's going to be possession limits, which is how many you can actually be in possession of. Some species, like the snow geese, do not have a limit. The beautiful white and black snow goose, there is no possession limit. You can have as many as you want in the freezer. So when we're talking about sustainability, and we're talking about self-reliance or self-sufficiency and living on the land sustainably and effectively and efficiently, hunting is a very good option if you look at these categories, if you look at those possession limits and the bag limits. And it goes further and further down the road. And there's a lot of other species. There's, for example, as we were saying, there's the feral hog. There is no limitations. You can hunt them however which way you want. They are to be killed as efficiently and as humanely as possible whenever possible, because they are an aggressive invasive species. You also have rock dove, also known as the common pigeon or street pigeon. There is no bag limit. There is no closed season. You can hunt pigeon all year round, because they're a non-native bird that is actually in some forms arguably invasive, and they're actually pushing into other birds' niches like the mourning dove and other native songbirds. And so hunting them can actually benefit the ecology. And there's a lot of other animals that are not on the hunting regulations that are still able to be shot. Somebody asked about woodchuck. That's one of those categories that in many provinces and states is referred to as a varmint animal. They're a problematic species for human involvement and human interaction, as well as for livestock, because they make big holes. Cow steps in the hole, breaks their leg, farmer loses a lot of meat and loses an animal that costs a lot of money. So there's a lot of, depending on where you are, there's going to be certain species that you can hunt with a lot more variety and a lot more options and a lot more season. And other animals are going to have shorter seasons. In Ontario, you have about 2 weeks to hunt with a firearm other than a muzzleloader for white-tailed deer. You have just 2 weeks, but the window for bow hunting is a lot wider. And if you include muzzleloader, you get even more time out there hunting that one animal. Whereas again, for Canada geese and other small, migratory game bird, you have from right now to the end of the year to hunt waterfowl. You have from now until New Year's Eve to hunt waterfowl, which is a very big open season that makes it much more conducive to being able to, bring home the bacon, for lack of a better term. I'm just going to quickly check the questions. I'm talking about what is legal to hunt. We're not about what's edible. Woodchuck and groundhog and all those animals are edible. Are they legal to kill where you live? You have to check your regulations, talk to your local wildlife officers, whether it's a conservation officer or the actual ministry or Department of Natural Resources where you live. That's part of the hunter safety course that you would be taking to become a legal hunter in your regions. They will actually give you a list of all the seasons, the bag limits, the species, and everything else like that. And you can learn from there.
Just to jump in for a sec, Caleb.
Sure.
I was just going to say too, just to do a little shameless plug here too. I mean, that's part of what we're going to do in the Hunter's Journey community is really help you wrap, because there's a ton of logistics to remember and learn.
Totally.
So part of what we do in that community is help you wrap your head around, like, how do you get legal? What can you hunt? Where do you find land to hunt? How do you get started? So we basically walk students through figuring out all those questions for their region. That's part of the experience that we have going on there. And as I say that, I mean, by all means, throw your questions in here tonight too, and we're happy to ask them. We are also approaching 9:30 quickly, just to give you a heads up there, Caleb, on our time.
Perfect. So that's pretty much where I want to wrap it up. Let's get into how to start hunting. Where can we start? Some tips and tactics we have to help you get into that. Chris actually has a couple of slides, and we're going to kind of just dive into this as quickly as we can while covering it as thoroughly as possible. So Chris is going to be my helper today. I'll rant while Chris relaxes, and he can throw in some ideas here and there. He's already been teaching for well over an hour before this class started, so I can talk a little bit more. So high leverage practice to get started, how to hone your skills. I read that a little bit backwards, but you got the gist.
Oh, you know what, Caleb, I could just jump in here really quick because you haven't seen the next slide, but I'll just throw in a little piece here. To me, this little slide here is so key to learning how to hunt and how to really read the land. Because when we think about the basic needs that everything needs, we need shelter, we need food, we need water, and then mating is part of what propels life forward. So in any target species, whether you want to hunt a squirrel or whether you want to hunt a goose or a deer, understanding these things in relation to the seasons is so key. So shelter could be like, where do they bed down? What protects them from the weather? What protects them from the predators? Seasonal migration with birds, right? So you want to go into your target species thinking about like what are the dynamics of their sheltering needs, and where is that in this landscape, and how might it change season to season, or weather condition to weather condition. And then you're going to want to identify, well, where does this animal go to drink? And then you're going to identify, well, what does it eat, and what does it eat different times of the year? And you're also going to want to know, when does it mate? And between shelter, food, water, and mating, you're going to have travel corridors where the animals move between these. And as a hunter, you basically need to figure out how to insert yourself in between those at the right time, in the right season, in the right time of year. So I found that little diagram there incredibly helpful. It's just a foundation for starting to think about how you're going to approach this. Let's go over to the next slide here.
This is a great one. So let's dive into this. High leverage practice to get started. Number one, journaling. I never took journaling seriously growing up. It's only been in the last 2 to 3 years. And I'll be frank, it's because Chris mentioned it to me a while back that I finally was like, okay, let's see. And it's really, really helpful, whether it's you're already hunting or you're getting into hunting and you haven't got your license, everything else figured out. Just start observing wildlife and observing things that you're noticing and jot those down. Get a notebook and a pencil or a pen that you carry with you in the field whenever you're in the field. And even when you're driving down the road, and you may be cruising down the road and you just look into the next field over as you're driving to work and you see, 2 or 3 deer in the middle of a field, and you go, okay, what time of day is it? Where am I? What are they eating? What's around them right now? And when you finally get to your destination, jot those down and put down those observations. Journaling has helped me really be able to go back and observe what I observed in the past and remind myself for the future. Journaling has really changed the game for me as a hunter.
A huge one I throw in there for deer is whenever I see a deer, I pay attention to, well, what way was the wind blowing from and where did the deer come from and where did it go? Because deer are hugely influenced by wind. Their sense of smell is their most dominant scent, followed by their hearing. And you can obviously hear way better if the wind is blowing in the direction that the wind is blowing towards you. So deer base a huge amount of their movement around the winds. So whenever I see deer, I think, okay, well, what's the weather right now? And where's the wind blowing from? And how do they move to work with that? Huge, huge tool right there.
Totally. And that kind of brings us to the second one. This is something that I've recommended to a lot of people, and I've never really connected it as much as when me and Chris were talking about this course. Watch wildlife, especially if you don't have your license yet, but even if you do have your license, go out, even out of season, and observe the wildlife as undisturbed as possible. Don't spook them. Don't try to necessarily stalk in close. Observe them. And as you build up that observational skills, you can start to get closer and closer and closer. It is incredibly important to understand how animals are acting when they're not being hunted, because that is how you want an animal to feel and act when you are hunting them. If an animal's on full alert and they're constantly moving their head back and forth, moving their ears, checking the wind, that animal's on high alert. The likelihood of you being able, especially with a bow where you have only like, Chris, what would you consider as an ethical range for you as a bow hunter? And let's say let's say wooded timber.
Yeah, I mean, with a homemade bow, like I want a shot inside of 20 yards, and ideally, I'm looking for inside of 12 yards. I mean, I'm talking close is what I'm going for.
So
and being able to practice actually sneaking up on deer throughout the year. And then if I get busted, but I'm not hunting, and say, okay, what gave me away that time? Did the wind shift? Did I do something with my body? One of my mentors has said, all the time when you're outside of the hunting season in your wood, that's your actual practice time. And you're going to make so many mistakes, and you're going to spook animals, and you're going to cling noises and do stupid things. And the more mistakes you make trying to get close to wildlife outside of hunting season, the less mistakes you're going to make inside of hunting season. So trying to do this year round is really, really helpful, whether it's a 100%. Squirrel in a city park or a deer or whatever you can, trying to watch and get up on animals and observe them.
It's really important. I cannot stress this enough, how important it is to understand stalking wildlife in a way that does not make them aware. You need to learn that to become a better, like Chris said, between 12 and 20 yards is ideal with a self bow that you made yourself out of wood. You can increase that with a compound bow. You can increase that with a crossbow. You can increase that with a shotgun. You can increase that with a rifle. But at the end of the day, that animal is going to be on high alert and willing to bust you and willing to run at any given second. And that's not going to be an easy hunt. So when you're trying to increase your success rates, training yourself to get closer to those animals. I've had newcomers who had just learned the day before simple stalking techniques get within 5 yards of a white-tailed deer that was bedded down until they said, "Hey, where am I going?" And they said it loud enough that the deer heard and stood up in front of them and took off. And made the poor guy nearly like crap his pants. Frankly, he was not expecting that deer there whatsoever, because he did the job so well on the first try, because we trained him for a whole day using me as the deer with my hands like that, closed eyes, trying to hear him moving in the woods. So training even with friends, but of course with actual live animals in the field out of season. Don't do it during season. It is the worst thing you can do, is try to learn to stalk when the animals are available to hunt, because you are going to make those mistakes, as Chris said. With making mistakes and getting better and practicing, we get into the third option, the third step, find a way to shoot. And I love, Chris was talking with me just before just during the break, throw a rock, throw rocks at targets. I don't care if you have a firearms license or a bow or anything like that ready. Start working your hand-eye coordination. One of my mentors once said to a friend of mine who was getting into basketball, "Oh, you want to be a better basketball player? Learn to play the piano," because it's hand-eye coordination and it's dexterity with the fingers to help manipulate the ball. And therefore, learning to work with the piano helps you become a better basketball player. For me, as a survival instructor who works in survival and trains people in emergency preparedness and emergency scenarios, I took improv acting classes when I was in high school to get better at improvising and thinking on my feet. So at the end of the day, it is the soft skills that build into your hard skills that are the important parts. Chris wrote right here, throw a rock, use an air gun, go to the range, use private land that you have a friend who's like, I own a gravel pit. We can shoot our firearms there or fire our bows on my backyard, whatever it may be. But learn the hand-eye coordination. One great way to learn, and it's one of my favorite ways to recommend people, become a photographer. You have to use all the same skills for hunting to get a picture. You're just shooting with film, or in modern day with a digital system that's a bunch of computers and stuff that I don't understand. But you need to go get close enough to get a clean, clear shot of that animal, whether it's a harlequin duck or a white-tailed deer or a black bear or a Dall sheep. If you can get close enough to that animal that it is relaxed and acting in its own simple way, and you have a camera set up and you have to line up that shot with that camera and take the shot, you're set. We lost the screen, the slideshow.
Yeah, I just took it down. I just took it down. There was only the last point on there, which was just around starting to learn how to track and starting to study maps, which are two really great things too. And when you're thinking about looking at maps, start to think about topography. So if you find a deer trail, don't just say, oh, cool, a deer trail. Say, where is this in the landscape? Is this on a ridge? Is this in between two ridges? How is it moving from one spot to the other? And we could spend a whole night when we have, she's actually on the call this evening, Dr. Kirsty Lawrence. She is a professional wildlife tracker, and she's going to be joining us on a future call. Super excited to have her on, and we're going to be really diving deep into tracking as a skill set for hunting. And we could really spend a bunch of time there, but that would be a great next one. And then the last point I just want to leave you on is having a mentor obviously goes a long ways. So we need to wrap up for the night. We're kind of over time here, but I just want to thank everyone for joining. So next week we have Cal and Sandy. Cal and Sandy are actually on the call as well. So Cal and Sandy, if you guys wanted to say hello in the chat really quick, they're with an organization called Original Wisdom. And they're going to be coming on next week, and they're going to be talking about the process of taking a life and kind of the journey around that. And they're also going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into hunting small game. So Caleb mentioned starting squirrel's a great starting point. Next week, we're going to actually start to talk about okay, well, what does that actually look like? How do you get started doing that? And we'll chat a little bit about tactics and things of that nature. So I hope you folks enjoyed this evening. I hope you come and join us for future ones. There's going to be 3 more free ones next week with Cal and Sandy. And then we have Alexis Burnett, and then we have Daniel Vitalis from Earth Tracks. And for those of you that are like, okay, I really connect with this and think this is, you guys are the community that I want and the mentors that I want, then I would love it if some of you came and joined us in the Hunter's Journey cohort, which is starting up right now. You can join anytime this fall. And me and Caleb and Kirsty and Sal and our Cal and Sandy will be your mentors for the next little bit, and we'll help you get from wherever you are right now to where you want to go in your hunter's journey. So again, Caleb just put it in there. thehuntersjourney.com is the link. And remember, if you put HWH, so hunting with heart, HWH 100, maybe throw that in the chat too, Caleb, that'll give you $100 off on the Hunter's Journey course. If you want to come join us. And of course, if you came here through one of the other mentions, Original Wisdom, Kirsty, Cal, if you came here through Daniel Vitalis, any of them, Earth Tracks, then please use the coupon code they gave you, because then we'll give them a little bit of a kickback to help support their awesome work in the world. Caleb, you want to say anything before we close here?
Thank you so much for being with us, folks. I know we went over, especially because it's my fault usually, we went well over time. This is something I'm really excited about. I'm in the middle of a bunch of other stuff, as you can tell, but I needed to be here tonight because I'm so addicted to this community that we've built and are trying to build with you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Someone just asked in the course. Yes. So I apologize if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but Noor, I think it maybe says there. Yeah, we definitely start right at the beginning. So we'll talk about how to actually get your license, how to hunt legally. We'll explain how the difference between tags and all of the lingo. And then we'll talk about how do you actually find land to hunt on. So we'll help you start working towards finding land, and then we'll get into species specific. So we'll definitely start right at the beginning with it. Any other questions for folks, just as we're rolling out here? Yeah, that's in the paid course. Feel free again, Noor, if you want to ask questions on here, by all means, throw them out and we'll answer them during the live calls. But inside of the actual course is where we actually work with people to really work through all these pieces, and it's a more focused mentoring. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we're going to call it a night there, everyone. Thanks a lot, and hopefully we'll see you next week on the 22nd. I'll send out an email with the replay. And then I also let you guys know we have a free chat spot online that you can come in there and share and get to meet some of the other people from the course here. So good night, everybody. I am going to ask that people kind of log off right away, if you don't mind too, because Caleb and I are going to stick around and just chat for a couple of minutes.